So my name's Caitlin Annis. I'm the lead HR consultant at NQHR. I'm one of the directors. We are very pleased to be joined by Charlie Vivian today for the session. Thank you very much, Charlie. We've got lots of people signed up for our last session of the year, which is great. So just before I hand over to Charlie, I just wanted to let you know about our next session. So the first session of 2023, which is taking place on the 9th of February. And we are going to be looking at neurodiversity in the workplace. And we will have a guest speaker. So from one of our clients, Para Orchestra, Jonathan Harper is going to be coming and talking to us about his experience of neurodiversity in the workplace, both good and bad experiences, which hopefully will be a great session. I also just wanted to let you know about People Spotlight, which is the monthly HR newsletter that NQHR provide. If you're interested in signing up for that, just go to our website and there's a link that you can click on to sign up for that. We just send out a few short articles each month on topical HR issues. I'm going to remain for the session and manage the questions, so please do ask questions. We want it to be as interactive as possible. I will then put the questions to Charlie throughout the session, and we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A. But I'm now going to hand over to Charlie.
Well, good morning, everyone. A couple of days ago, Caitlin shared the attendee guest list with me, and I believe there are about 180 of you, and a fantastic range of organisations you work for as well, which immediately left me with a sense of imposter syndrome, because I was looking at this and thinking, why are they going to come and talk to me? But actually, of course, I have been full-time in occupational medicine since 1999, and I know I don't look that old, but I have. And I've been a consultant since 2004. So hopefully, actually, there will be something useful. I got taught years ago that the purpose of public speaking is to inform and to persuade and then to entertain. And I hope we'll achieve all three of those today. As Caitlin has already mentioned, if we were meeting in person, I'd very much want this to be an interactive type of session, because, you know, that old expression, it's not you, it's me. Well, actually, it's the other way around here. This really is about you. It's about what your needs are, not what mine are. So I'm very, very happy for you to be asking your questions, and we try and actually deal with the things as we go along. So that's sort of the introduction. And then my first slide is somewhat rather nostalgic, I think, because this picture, of course, is Nick Clegg in the era when politicians actually used to say sorry when they did something wrong. Gosh, weren't those the good old days? But actually, I feel like I need to say sorry as a representative for occupational medicine, because, of course, the general experience I hear of HR managers and managers in their interactions with Occ Health is it all tends to be a little bit of a disaster, because we're really expensive, we're really slow, we tell you things you already know, we take the employee's side, we're overly optimistic in the advice we give, we sit on the fence, and we block the disciplinary process. So no wonder you wouldn't be thrilled with us. And once again, I extend my humble apologies for that. Hopefully today will go some way towards unlocking some of these, so that we can actually, so that you can enjoy a much more effective relationship with your OH provider. But I have got some good news for you today, and I suppose I should now go woo, and don't pretend that you don't watch Take Me Out on Saturday nights as well. It was a staple favourite for our family, but I really, really do want to try and empower you today in terms of your interactions with Occ Health. So really, then the next thing I've got to do is say, well, what is the key to this? And the answer is this. Sorry. The acronym, the YMCA, really is the secret, as you will see. In fact, there was one organisation I worked for where the head of sickness absence management walked across the car park towards me one day, and she went, "Charlie," and then she sort of stopped and she looked at me and went, "It's the YMCA," and turned around, and I sort of called after her, "It's the YMCA." And I hope we'll see just how useful this acronym is. Now, I estimate 3 of you at the end of this session will go, now I know it's about in the Navy, but it isn't, it's about the YMCA. Please don't get that wrong. So what does this stand for? Well, the first thing is the Y. It doesn't actually stand for anything. It just helps you remember the rest of the acronym. Although it may be that it means, it could be stop yelling or why me, but it doesn't have anything active in it. So the 3 bits that you need to remember are first the M, which is what is the true medical condition. That's the bit where I'm seeing the individual, I'm talking with them about their health condition, their symptoms, the functional impact of their condition, the treatment they're on, what the prognosis is likely to be. And I will then write a report tackling all that information. You get that report and you then do the C, which is you consult with the employee to look at the report and agree whether you both understand what I'm saying in the same way. If you don't, or if there's some disagreement or you're not sure about something, then of course what you should do is you should come back to me to clarify that. But you mustn't be left with a report where there isn't agreement or it doesn't actually help. You haven't got a clear way on how to proceed from here. I don't know about you, but something magical seems to happen when you put doctor in front of your name because everyone thinks you're God. But actually, my understanding is there isn't a vacancy in that role. So, please challenge your medical providers if they've given a report that actually isn't really helping you. You then do the final bit, which is you look at the adjustments that I've been recommending and you decide if those are reasonable. So many times I will receive referrals from managers and it will say, what reasonable adjustments do you recommend? To which I respond, the adjustments you need to think about are these. You must decide if they're reasonable. I can't do that. I can't work out whether this is going to work for you and your team. So next question, when should you involve Occ Health? And the answer is when there's a problem with performance or attendance or behaviour, and you think there may be an underlying medical cause for it. That's the time when Occ Health ought to be involved. So let's just look at the YMCA as in practice. And I'm going to take a really simple example to begin with. So this is Sergey. He's a 28-year-old and he works in the stores and he lifts something awkwardly and he develops back pain and he goes off sick. After 2 weeks, you receive another sick note from the GP saying that he'll be off sick for another couple of weeks. So what do? Obviously, you then refer to occupational health because there's a problem with the attendance and maybe you're worried about his longer term performance as well. So the report that you receive back says he's got simple back pain. There's nothing, he's not done anything serious to the back. His symptoms are improving, but actually what he can do at the moment remains reduced. So he's not able to go back and do his normal job. He is having physio, but the expectation is he is going to be able to do his normal job within the next 2 to 4 weeks. He is fit with some limitations. And actually you look at those adjustments that I've recommended and you say, yeah, I can cope with those. So he comes back to work on those restricted duties. And then his symptoms settle and he returns to his normal role. That is simples. That's the YMCA at its most simple, demonstrating how it actually works. Let's take a more complicated one now. So this is Darren. He's a 33-year-old delivery driver and he goes off sick for a couple of months with depression. You send him across to me. I say, look, I have a chat with Darren. I say, you're ill. And he said, yes. I said, you're not going to be going back to work soon. He says, no. I said, I don't think you'll be back for the next 3 to 6 months and possibly longer. And he says, I agree. So my report back to you says exactly that. Now, you go through the report with him, you're doing the consultation with him and say, okay, look, Charlie's written this. Do you agree? And he says, yes, that's fine. But then you turn around to him and say, well, Darren, we can't keep you on. If you're not able to return to work within the next 3 to 6 months, we can't keep your job open. We will need to let you go. I'm sorry. At which point, he then strongly disagrees with my report, which begs the question, what do you do? And the answer is, of course, that you go back to the C, you seek further clarification, you go back up again and you seek further clarification from me, because everyone thought we had a situation where it was all agreed about what the plan was. And actually now Darren's not in agreement with it. So that needs to come back to me again so that I can actually deal with that again and look at that. And in this sort of scenario, I may well phone Darren again and say, look, this is the situation. He's a driver, so we've got to think about his fitness to drive, but let's assume that that's not the main problem, that he is actually medically fit to drive. And it may well be that I'll say to him, look, Darren, I don't think you are going to cope, but I recognise that since the only alternative is that you will be dismissed on grounds of ill health if you don't go back, I'm quite happy to support a trial return to work, and we see how it goes. And I'll be delighted if you prove me wrong. You know, if you actually do succeed and go back to work successfully, fantastic. But I think we just have to be realistic that, you know, you're poorly, and that might be difficult. Okay, now let's look at the YMCA when we're thinking about adjustments. So this is Beryl. She's a 50-year-old receptionist, and you've referred her because she's had a historically very high rate of sickness absence. And you send it to me. I write back and say, yes, the reason why she's having these absences is because she suffers with chronic migraines. She tends to have a migraine every 6 weeks, and when she does, it will tend to last for a couple of days. She's had these problems for the last 2 years. They are severe migraines. She's been under the care of a neurologist. Various treatments have been tried. There hasn't really been any benefit. And basically, this pattern of absence is going to persist. So what should you do about that? Well, you've got the M, you consult with Beryl. Beryl agrees with that as being the right situation. So you now need to look at this and say, okay, are these adjustments reasonable? Because effectively what I'm now accepting is that every 6 weeks or thereabouts, she is going to have a couple of days of sickness absence. Can I accommodate that or not? And of course, if you can't accommodate it, if it's not a reasonable adjustment, then you have to think about whether or not you have to dismiss her on grounds of being medically unfit to do her job. So you would say, go on, Caitlin.
Sorry, Charlie, I've had a couple of questions. Do you want to finish that slide and then we'll come in?
Yeah, well, I'm literally just going to say this last bit. So, the point here would be that you therefore need to set targets for attendance that are acceptable to you. But obviously you do that with sympathy and compassion. This is a person who's got a pretty brutal illness that is just causing major problems repeatedly. She's not skiving or shirking, she's just poorly, and that's causing her great problems. But of course, if you can't accommodate her, the adjustments she needs, she is medically unfit to work. What were the questions here?
We've had a few questions. One specifically related to that slide, which is, are we assuming that she's disabled?
I'll come back to the disability bit in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then I'll answer that question at that point.
Yeah, of course. And one of the other questions is also around, a view around disability. So we'll leave that one. So the other question is, why most of the time do occupational health reports tend to regurgitate what the individual has told them? I generally do not find anything useful in the report, just summaries of what we already know from the employee.
I know. To which I go back to my second slide. Sorry, it is really difficult. One of the things when I had a trainee, if I don't know exactly what's going on, I will write to a specialist or the GP and try and find out a bit more about what's going on. But I would say to the trainee, look, remember, you go first. So in other words, it's not about you simply getting a response from the GP or the specialist. You want to tell the GP and specialist what your view is to begin with, okay? And in this circumstance, what I would be saying is that if you feel like you are simply getting regurgitated information, then maybe the opportunity is to be much more bold in the referral that you write, in terms of saying, look, this is the situation from how we see it. Here are the difficulties we have. Because if the OH practitioner then begins to get into becoming an advocate for the patient, and again, we will deal with this in one of the later slides, then you've already set the scenario in terms of saying, look, actually, these are the problems we need addressed. So it's not just about you telling us what the employee is telling you. We actually need to try and resolve these various difficulties. But I will talk about that again in more detail in a later slide.
Fantastic, thank you.
So going on, I just want to say that I think, I've mentioned this sympathy and compassion. I think it is actually really important to remember we do need to be kind. What I would normally do when we were all in the room together is I would now ask for a show of hands for when the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, did a study analysis of the number of fraudulent claims they received. I would ask you as delegates to put your hands up in terms of what you estimated that percentage would be. And clearly we can't do that at the moment. But actually, before I go on, I just want to ask you that question. What percentage do you think they found? Actually, come up with a number in your head as what you think it might be. Now, when I do this talk, normally what I get is a range between somewhere between 30% and 70% that people think are just swinging the lead and being fraudulent. I did have one person who said 100%, and I said, what, you mean you think every single person coming through is just swinging the lead? And he said yes, and I went, oh, okay. But actually the figure is this, it's 0.7%. So in other words, fewer than 1 in 100 people who are putting in claims for DWP benefits are doing so fraudulently, or in a way that of course is demonstrably fraudulent, and therefore the figure may be higher. But again, if we think of that range of the sort of the background level that people expect is between 30 and 70%, well, even 10 times higher than this would only be 7%. So it's still massively below what we think. And I think therefore we have to bear in mind that we may be worried about constant people swinging the lead, but it isn't anything like as big a problem as we might fear. I think another slide is really, really interesting that I want to show you, another graph. It's not this one, it's the next one, but let me just talk you through this one first. So this is the UK unemployment rate, and it's varied, you can see, between 1980 and 2016. I don't know if you can see my pointer just come in. You can see the normal fluctuation in unemployment rates according to the economic cycle. This is the really interesting graph though, because what's happened since the late 70s, where approximately 400,000 people had been off sick at any time, really back from the 1960s, you see it starts increasing, and it just goes up and up and up, to the point actually by the early 2000s where the figure is now 2.2 million. That's a 5.5-fold increase. Now, there's no change in the population physical health that can explain that. There's no obvious change in population psychological health that can explain that. So something else is happening to explain this, and I don't really know what it is. It may be, I think it is really interesting, this actually starts around the time that we had Thatcherism and neoliberal capitalism came in. And there are some very interesting arguments about how the changes in what we expect of our workforce have caused stress, and that may well be what is then fueling an epidemic of illness. That is one plausible explanation. I can point people towards some of the books that talk about that sort of thing if you're interested in it. But the point is, however we look at it, I view this as the most important slide of my career, because I'm looking at this going, well, we have much, much more incapacity benefit than we used to, and we haven't got a clear cause for that. Something very strange is going on.
Charlie, I've just had a quick question saying, could you just clarify what claims you're talking about?
So incapacity benefit claims. So it's, these are people saying, I'm ill, I can't work. And that the point is, it's a very small number where it is clearly fraudulent, which again is why I can't remember the case. It was back, I think, in the 80s. There was a legal case that talked about how managers should proceed with sympathy, understanding, and compassion when dealing with people with illnesses. So let's talk about, Caitlin, do you have another question?
I just have one other question, which is, our occupational health provider does not usually provide information about the nature of the medical condition in their reports. Can we ask for this?
The answer to that is that different OH people view that differently, because some will take the view and say, look, this is a medical condition, you're not medical, you don't actually need to know what the diagnosis is, therefore I'm not going to tell you. Others will write reports that are almost exclusively medical, giving you all sorts of detailed information about what's going on medically, which actually, again, isn't terribly useful, because you're sitting there going, but I'm not medical. I don't really understand what this medical test means or what the significance of this is. What I try to do is something in between, because, of course, actually, most of the time, if they've gone off sick, you will have a sick note with a diagnosis on. So what does it mean if I turn around and don't tell you the diagnosis in my report? Kind of doesn't make an awful lot of sense, really, because that information is already out there in your sphere. But the real secret to occupational medicine, of course, is what we're trying to do is focus in on what is the functional impact of this. So what can they do and what can't they do as a result of their medical condition? Because the condition itself is not the important bit, it's what they can and can't do that is determining their fitness to work. So I would hope that the reports you receive will focus in on that. My reports do provide some medical information, because I just, honestly, I just think it feels a bit twee not to include anything at all. It just doesn't sit comfortable with me. But some are very strict on that in a way that I don't think is necessary, but it is recognised within the industry. Okay. So let's talk about the Equality Act, because as we mentioned, Beryl might come under that. Let's think about this. So the Equality Act, of course, in the past was the DDA, the Disability Discrimination Act 1995, and the DDA was subsumed along with lots of other forms of discrimination into the Equality Act 2010. And essentially, an employee is disabled if they have a medical condition. Strictly, it's an impairment. That's what the Act says. They have a medical condition which has a substantial and long-term impact on normal daily activities. Now let's just unpack that. What do we mean by that? Well, substantial is defined as not trivial. So we can say that's a pretty low bar. And long-term generally means the condition has lasted for a year, or is likely to last for a year, or it's a condition that keeps recurring, and therefore, they might be well for a while, but they're likely to continue to have further bouts of illness as well. And normal daily activities are exactly that, just being able to get on and live your life. Interestingly, there is now case law that says that includes the ability to do your job as well. So, if the person's condition is preventing them doing their work, then my advice to you would be assume actually that the Equality Act applies in that case. There are a few conditions that are automatically qualifying as disabilities, things like cancer and HIV. Probably because in the past, there were huge amounts of discrimination against people because of those, and so those were just automatically qualified, regardless of whether they were having a substantial impact on the person. It's important to remember that it is ultimately a legal decision, not a medical decision. Again, many of my colleagues will write, this is a legal decision, and I'm therefore not going to give you a clear view. To be honest, when I've talked to employment solicitors about this, they say that the thing is all very clearly worked out in tribunals now. So, if you think it's substantial and long term, then basically advise them to assume the Equality Act applies. And that's what I will put within my reports. I'll say, look, it is substantial and long time. I advise you to proceed as though the Equality Act applies. You will see from this, of course, that therefore the Equality Act is pretty broad, and you are legally obliged to consider adjustments. If you don't, you cannot defend your position. So you must consider adjustments. That's what the law requires of you. But I want to suggest that actually the Equality Act is a bit of a red herring. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you use the YMCA approach, then in every single case, you will be considering what adjustments considering the reasonableness of the adjustments. So if you're doing that in every case, whether the Equality Act applies or not doesn't really matter, because you're always looking at the adjustments and saying, are these reasonable or not? It doesn't change the fact we need to think about the Equality Act, but I think good practice, good management practices, you will be thinking about adjustments anyway, and how you can help your employees stay at work. Okay, so now let's think about the YMCA. Caitlin?
Sorry, Charlie, a couple of questions. One is quite involved, so let's do the short one first. With something like benign prostate hyperplasia, I might have got that wrong, being treated count as a disability in your view?
Well, the thing to remember, the two things with that is, firstly, what you've got to think about is what is the functional impact. So if someone's got an enlarged prostate, it may be that, of course, they're having to go to the loo regularly, and if they're in a call centre, for example, and they're having to go to the loo every hour, that might be quite disruptive in terms of their work. And therefore, we're saying, well, that is having a substantial impact. It is likely to be long term because it's likely to last. And of course, remember, the other trick with this is you have to consider the condition off medication.
Okay.
So the individual may be taking something like tamsulosin to control their symptoms, but actually what you have to do is think about whether or not how they would be if they weren't on treatment, and therefore it may well be that they would be disabled even if their symptoms are well controlled in this situation. So we go back, it's not so much the diagnosis we need to be thinking about, but what is the functional impact with them not on treatment. Okay,
yeah.
That's the secret to that. Next question.
The other one, you may cover this, but let's have a think. So this is about somebody not completing a pre-medical clearance form and then immediately being signed off with a variety of medical conditions that they haven't disclosed. What are the risks around that? Now, some of that may not sit with you, and I'd be happy to chat to people afterwards if they've got specific questions. But what's your view on the sort of pre-employment medical questionnaires that people perhaps don't disclose conditions?
I mean, the first thing to say is I want to go back even further and say, are pre-employment screening, is it useful? And the answer to that is not really. When research was done on this, they realized that everything we hoped it was doing, that, you know, if you think about all these stakeholders, everything we hoped it would do, the evidence was it didn't really work. So pre-employment screening, unfortunately, is not terribly effective. I do some screening for one company, but, you know, before I started doing it, I said, look, we can do it, but, you know, it may not be that it does what we want it to do. So you're paying me money for something where I'm saying this may not actually achieve an awful lot. So that's the first thing I want to say to people is, if you do pre-employment screening, think about that again in terms of exactly, is it going to achieve what you want it to achieve. My view, though, is on this case, if someone has deliberately withheld information that has then led to them being appointed, and if they had disclosed that information to the OH practitioner, and it then would have affected the advice about whether they were fit to work, then I view that as an issue effectively of fraud, isn't it? It's a dishonest. It's a matter of saying you are fit to work when you aren't fit to work. And I kind of would take that view on it. It, of course, then gets very difficult, because if you come back to me and say, was this all disclosed? I would then need to get their permission to clarify whether they were happy for me to disclose it. But even that wouldn't be the end of the story, because if they said no, I would then explain to them, well, I'm going to go back and say, I'm afraid I can't answer your question because I'm not being given permission to disclose this. Therefore, you go ahead and manage the situation with the limited medical information you have. Because what you do have is the medical certificate saying they're fit to work and they're expected to provide regular and efficient service. That's from me. But actually the practice is completely different very early on. You decide how you're going to manage that. So even if they don't consent, it's not the end of the road for you as the employer.
And as I said, that one is quite complicated, and there are some other sort of HR issues that you'd want to think through. So I'm really happy to chat about that one after the session, perhaps. We've got one other short one. How does an employer demonstrate that they have considered adjustments?
Clearly, you have to do it, as in, you know, it shouldn't just be a sort of a tick box exercise. It should be, okay, let's really think about what the implications of these adjustments are and write it down, because if it's written down, you can then, you know, you've then got your proof that you have thought about it. Now, of course, it's not you who decides if the adjustments are reasonable. Well, it's you who decides. It doesn't mean you won't be criticised for that. If the individual is then dismissed and claims unfair dismissal, it will go to an employment tribunal, and the employment tribunal will decide whether or not you have been reasonable in your approach. But you can see how, you know, the whole point is, I can't tell you what adjustments are reasonable. You have to make a decision about that, and I think we do that, you know, in good conscience. That's the point. Is what can we do to try and help this person? But if actually what they need is much more than we can give, well, that's the way it is. But, you know, unfortunately, we can't do that. Sorry, but no.
And I think we would always suggest to clients to do that in consultation with that member of staff. Talk to them about what they think would be useful, and keep it under review and check in with them to see, is this working? Are there other things we could be trying? And note all of that, so that you've got a really good record of what you've been trying to do and what has and hasn't worked. Yeah,
perfect. Agreed. Okay. How about let's look at the YMCA, where we've got someone who's failed to improve as expected. This is John. He's a 45-year-old mechanic who's got a very heavy physical role, and he develops an upper limb disorder, so, you know, problem in his shoulder perhaps. He has various treatments for that, but you know, and when I see him, I say, well, it seems like he's getting better, and actually I think he's going to get better in the next 1 to 2 months. But at the 2-month point, he's actually plateaued and is still a long way off normal, and is not yet in any way fit to go back and do his normal job. What do we do? Well, think about again the MCA. I've given a clear view. and I've suggested the adjustment is that he's not going to be fit for the next couple of months, but then should be fit after that. But that isn't what's happened. So we go back up and we do the C, which is you come back to me for further clarification. Because what we've got here is a problem with plateau management. This is what I expected to happen. The person would get better gradually over time, and then they would be back to normal. In reality, what happened was they got a bit better and then they sort of plateaued off. And we've got that gap between what I was expecting would happen and what has actually happened. So of course, what you do is you write back to me and say, "Dear Charlie, thank you for your report. You are a liar. You lied to me because you said they were going to get better." And then, I will write back and say, "Well, I thought they were going to get better. Clearly they haven't. The best predictor of the future is the past history, because now we're in this situation on the lower red line. Actually, that's probably the more likely outcome from now, and therefore you now need to review the adjustments and decide whether those are reasonable." But of course, for John, he's a mechanic. He's there to do heavy work, and if he can't do that, he's medically unfit for his role. What about the YMCA when we're looking at someone with low motivation? This is Ben. He's 27 years old. He's got chronic pain that he said was caused by work, and he can't return to work because he has to do heavy work at work, and he blames the company for the fact that he's been unwell. So what are we going to do with him? Well, actually, it's pretty straightforward. What we're saying is, look, you may blame work for having made you ill, and that may or may not be the case. That could be dealt with, through legal channels if necessary. But actually, what we want from you is your ability to work. And if you can't do the job because of medical illness, then actually, of course, what you're saying is you're medically unfit. And at some point, we will then have to manage that and that could, of course, lead to you being dismissed because you're medically unfit to do your job. You set your targets, therefore, and again, we come back to this concept of sympathy and compassion and understanding, because it's obvious this could all be terribly fraught, and he's angry, and that causes anger and frustration in everyone else as well. But actually, the simple fact is what we need to be doing is saying, look, Ben, you're not fit to do your job, and ultimately, if you cannot get back to work at some point, that will result in you being dismissed on grounds of ill health. What about the issue of motivation and denial? Now, this is Chris. He's a 54-year-old senior manager, and he suffers a stroke, and unfortunately it knocks out the speech part of his brain, which means he can't actually think of the right words to say, this condition called aphasia. This has gone on for months and months, so frankly he's not going to get an awful lot better, but his role involves constant communication by speaking. That's an essential non-negotiable part of his role. And Chris is desperate to return to work, so what do we do? There's a saying in occupational medicine that with motivation, almost anything is possible, and without it, almost nothing is. So when we have someone like Chris who wants to return to work, often what we can do is find ways to overcome those obstacles and help them come back to work. But many of the people I see with very high levels of motivation couple that with denial about the impact of their condition. So they try and think they can come back to work when the reality is they just can't come back to work. It's not going to be an achievable goal. There is just no way it can happen. And that is, this comes up fairly regularly in my clinics, and it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's kind of an important one that I have with the individuals and say, I will talk them through that motivation denial conundrum. And it helps us to agree that actually the functional ability is well below what is actually required for their role, and therefore they are unfit to work. And with something like a stroke, it can, people can improve for up to 2 years after it, but frankly, most of the improvement happens within the first few months. So after you get to the sort of 6 months, certainly the 12-month point, any further improvements are going to be pretty modest. So if Chris isn't fit to do his job now, several months on, he's probably not going to be fit in the future, unless, of course, you can identify some adjustments to his role that actually overcome the problems with his speech.
Can I just give a couple of questions? Some I'm going to save to the end because I'm conscious you need to be able to go through some of the slides. We've just had one. Would you agree then that it's the employer who needs to say what level of sickness absence they can sustain or not?
Yes, definitely. It's absolutely your right to determine what functional ability you need from people and what level of attendance you need and what behaviour. That's absolutely your right to do that. the whole point is, of course, do remember you may have to justify that. So if you're being very strict, it may well be that you are more likely to attract people going for employment tribunals, and then you have to justify why you set that level. I mean, when I'm talking to individuals about this, because there's, they'll often speak to individuals and they say, oh, it's only a small thing. I'm not having that much time off sick, or I'm able to do most of my job, but not all of it. I say to them, well, look, let me take an extreme. If you could only do 5% of your work, no manager's going to say that's all right. No one's going to say that's acceptable. Then we'll keep things going. But conversely, if you can do 95% of your job, most of us would feel a bit uncomfortable if the manager's turning around and saying, well, that's not good enough. You have to do 100%, or it's no good at all, and and you're unfit for work. And I say, and of course, the whole point is most people fall somewhere between those two extremes. You're not at the 5%, you're at the 95%. But therefore, it's now for your manager to decide whether the adjustments they're making for you are reasonable or not. Attendance, performance, behaviour, because all of those are fitness to work issues.
And then we've just had one comment, just going back to the idea of pre-employment questionnaires, somebody saying they totally agree with your views on that. Is there any written research on this, and whether or not they are useful?
There is. Faculty of Occupational Medicine did some research, I think probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. I could probably dig it out if you remind me at the end, and I'll try and find it. But it was one of those hilarious things, because actually you're sort of going, well, we thought we were being useful here, and actually not really being useful at all. And and everyone's expecting it to do something, and it's not doing that. So yes, there is research evidence to that effect.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlie.
Okay, so let's get on to the biased OH report. This is Sharon, and she's gone off sick with stress. And I see her, well, not me, obviously, because I wouldn't be saying this, but you get your OH report back saying the stress is work-related because the workload has increased enormously following the appointment of a new manager. Your view of the situation is that actually Sharon is lazy, and that a new manager is finally managing her because the previous managers haven't been robust enough and basically allowed her just to get on and do nothing. But the problem you have, of course, is you've got an OH report that's come in that it actually looks biased, because what it seems to be doing is taking sides with her. What are you going to do? You're going to do the C. You're going to stay at the C and say to Sharon, well, look, we've had this report, but actually we've got a few more queries about this, and we want to go back and clarify the situation, clarify our view of the situation with the manager, with the OH provider. And just to put this into some sort of context, if you did that with me, I would then be saying, okay, thank you very much for your report. I recognise that there is a different view about the situation. So you need to try and agree a narrative with the person in terms of how you go forward. Which brings me on to the $64,000 statement. I knew Occ Health was expensive, but this is ridiculous. That statement is this: I recognise that this captures her view of the situation, and you may see things differently. Because of course, what she said to me is, it's work related. I'm really stressed. The workload has increased enormously, and that's the problem. That's her view of the situation. But by including this statement, what I'm making very clear to Sharon, and indeed anyone else who reads the report, is this is not an objective statement of reality. This is her perception of the situation. And you may see things differently. It means that there is therefore that opportunity for ongoing conversations about what the true nature of the difficulty is.
Can I just, one quick question, sort of going back to this idea of bias, I suppose, which is how does the occupational health advisor ascertain if an injury is truthful, particularly when the meeting is held online? Thinking of someone who says they've hurt their back at work, but there's no witnesses and no accident report.
Yeah, you're right. There is no easy way to do that. But I would say to you, even if I'm sitting with the person in a room, how can I demonstrate that that's been caused by work? I can't. In the end, that's a really good question. I'm just worried I'm not going to have time to unpack it as much as I want to. It's a really good question. Caitlin, you'll just have to have me back to answer that question, and I'll come back for another 45 minutes and talk about that on its own, because that's a really good question. But I think I'm going to pause it for the moment, unless we have time at the end, and we can look at that one again. So let's think about Sharon and her stress. The best model for stress, I think, is this transactional model that thinks about stress like a set of scales, where we say that stress is caused by a mismatch between the tasks expected of a person and their individual capability. So a person becomes stressed either because they lack the ability to do the job, or because the task expected of them is unrealistic for one person to cope with. Now, let's look at Sharon's situation. You know, she's effectively saying the workload has increased enormously, whereas actually the manager is saying, well, Sharon, you were doing, 3 tasks per day, but everyone else is doing 6 tasks per day. So what I've done is I've increased your workload to reflect what everyone else is doing. So yes, you've seen a doubling of your workload, but in reality, your workload is now reflecting what everyone else is doing. And that's why you're stressed, because actually you've seen a doubling of your tasks. But unfortunately, my view about this is that this is an issue of capability, because you can't do the work to the level that I need from you. Okay, so you can see how useful this is, because it actually, the HSE definition of stress talks about, that people's perception of them having too much to do, which tells us what the problem is. But what this model does is it helps us to unpick, well, what's the cause of that? You're feeling stressed. Okay, that's the problem. Now let's look into why that stress is there. Is it tasking? Is it capability? And of course, there are a few other things. It could be like relationships and lack of clarity about role, etc., etc. But for workload, this model is incredibly helpful. Last thing we need to do, because I think this is one of the last slides now, is talking about Sharon. You want to get her in to have a conversation about her work, and effectively it will be an investigation type of meeting in terms of her fitness to actually be able to do her job. She doesn't want to come in for those meetings, and her GP keeps signing her off sick with work-related stress, and she's not fit to come in. So the question is she fit to attend meetings? And the answer to that is basically what we use is the fitness to plead criteria. Someone's fitness to plead in a court of law, and that has 4 parts to it. So firstly, can the employee understand the concerns that have been raised against them? Can they follow the proceedings of the meeting itself? Can they defend themselves or instruct someone else to do so on their behalf? And then finally, can they understand the outcome? Because if the answer to all of those is yes, then they are medically fit to attend the meetings. And unless they've got a severe psychosis, unless they've got a psychosis and then out of touch with reality, then basically they're medically fit to attend these meetings. The thing you've got to remember, a couple of things you've got to remember though. Firstly, we're trying to manage the situation as effectively as possible. So for example, if they've gone off with stress, it may be that a delay in getting them back in makes sense, because then if they've been put on medication or they've started some counselling or whatever, that gives them the opportunity to allow that to work a bit, so they may be functioning better. And the other thing to remember, of course, is that a court has no duty of care towards the individual, whereas you as an employer do. So if you insist on them coming to meetings and that makes them more stressed, then potentially there's a sort of a liability issue that comes with that. Now, what I do with these sort of circumstances, where the person is really reluctant to come in, I will talk them through this. And I'll say, at the end of the day, you don't have to go in. You could ask someone else to go in your place. You could ask for the questions to put you in writing, and you'll respond in writing. You could just refuse to engage with the process. But remember, that doesn't stop management proceeding. And the less you engage, the less likely it is that your side of the story is going to be fully heard and considered. So it's trying to help the individual to engage as best they can, because it's unlikely to be to their benefit if they don't do that. So in summary, it's the YMCA, and that's kind of it. So the way forward from here, firstly, I just need to say this: I'm honestly not here to pitch work. I have got a lot of work, but if you need help, I'm more than happy for you to contact me, and I'll try and do some work for you as well. What I really hope is that through this presentation, you now have tools that are reliable from your perspective to help you manage your OH provider, so that actually you're not feeling like you're being left with reports that don't help you to manage the situation. Because I will say to people, look, my involvement stops when you are clear about how you are now going to manage this situation. And until we've got to that point, my role isn't finished. But as soon as you're happy from a management point of view what you're going to do, I don't need to be involved any further. You get on and you manage it. But I'd also be willing to help you, on a consultancy basis. So, for example, you've got an OH provider and you want to carry on with them, but you want to sort of optimize your use of them. Well, it may be that I can help you with some audits of what they're doing. I can be your advocate in terms of actually your interactions with them to try and make sure that they are doing things as best they can. and I can be involved in training teams as well. But you know, I want to say again, my diary is busy. I promise I'm not pitching for work, and I hope it doesn't sound like I am. And that's it. So I'm going to unshare my screen and pass back to Caitlin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlie. I suppose what I would say, that was a really brilliant presentation. Thank you, Charlie. Really helpful. From an HR perspective, and also from many years working as an employment lawyer, I think the key things that really help with this process is drafting a really good referral letter to your occupational health physician, so that you are really clearly asking the questions that you want answered. Because very often there'll be a report that comes back that the client will say, this just doesn't help us. And actually part of the reason it doesn't help is because they haven't clearly asked the question that they want answered. And I think the second thing would be not to be afraid to go back to say, I would like some more information, as Charlie said, to have that dialogue, to say, I don't quite understand this, or I need some more information. And we would always suggest giving some really clear background about what's going on with this individual. Is there a disciplinary going on? Is there a grievance? What do you want them to be able to do? And ask questions about whether or not they're fit to do that, if that's the sort of process that you're in. That way you'll get the most out of the occupational health report, I think.
Caitlin, could I pitch on that? Because I think that's a really interesting thing, because there are two things to say, I think, in addition to that. The first thing is, I deal with some managers who have enormous experience of OH and know exactly what they want from me, and that's absolutely fine. I have quite a lot of others who have actually had little, if any, interaction with OH before, so they honestly don't know what they want and need. And I try and kind of hold their hands through that process and say, look, I'll do my best to give you the information that I think you need, because that's then going to allow you to manage the situation. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is, you know, there are times where you have a very, very tricky individual who is not engaging in the process. And the manager knows that if they go ahead and write a detailed referral at the beginning, the individual is simply going to refuse to engage with that, and they're not going to come along. And in those circumstances, what I'd say to the manager is, well, look, write a relatively benign report, referral through, that's fine. And I will write a response based on what the individual has told me. And then when you receive that, you consult with the individual and say, well, look, Charlie's written this and this, but actually we don't agree with that for the following reasons. So we're now going to go back to him for clarification. So, you've got your report that you feel reflects what the individual said, but it's almost like you've deliberately engineered it that way, because then it provides you with the opportunity to then, ask the questions that would have been blocked if you tried to ask them in the first place.
Sure. So we've got quite a few questions, which I'll cover some of those now. One of them is probably more to me, which is, do you have samples of good letters to occupational health, types of questions to ask, etc. We do. We regularly help clients sort of craft those letters. So absolutely feel free to come to us and have a chat about that. And we have got some documents that we can help you with. What would be your view, this is for you, Charlie, if someone regularly said they were unfit to work for half of their working day, for example, headaches after working for a few hours, but said their GP wouldn't provide a fit note as they haven't been absent for 7 days in a row?
Well, the answer is that there is no legal requirement for the GPs to provide a fit note in the first 7 days. In fact, I think it's gone up to 14 days now. I think I'm right in saying. But it's, there's no requirement for the GP to do that. And we all know that GPs are under enormous pressure and are not looking for more things to do. So I think that's the sort of situation where I'd be saying, well, look, take it on face value. The person is saying they have got a medical condition that's interfering with their ability to attend work. So you can say to them, look, fully understand that. Go and talk to your GP as much as possible. See if you can get some more treatment to try and help manage your condition. Because the problem is that this level of attendance is causing us real problems. And if it doesn't improve, we're going to be in a really difficult situation, aren't we? Okay. And then, be clear about what attendance levels you need from the individual. And if they then continue to fall short of that, then you go ahead and you carry on managing it and saying, look, unfortunately, this amounts to a capability issue because you are not attending. In fact, I think I'm right in saying, you may know that I think that's a conduct if it's attendance, it's a conduct rather than a capability issue, isn't it? I think.
It could be either, depending on what the source is really of somebody you know, not being able to attend or deciding not to attend. I suppose you could come at it from either way.
Yeah.
We've had a similar sort of question, which is about somebody. What if somebody signed off stress in relation to home life problems? We can't dismiss on grounds of ill health. How is it possible to manage this? Well, I suppose that's back to the thing that you've been talking about, Charlie. It's still stress. It doesn't matter where that source of stress is coming from. It's about thinking about what the impact is on them at work.
Can I just check? Did you say that the question is they can't be dismissed on grounds of ill health?
That's what the question says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I can respond to that, the answer is yes, you can. This is and now quite an infrequent thing that I hear with patients coming into me. But if you are not medically, if you cannot provide regular service and you cannot provide efficient service because of a medical condition, that is a fair reason to dismiss. So, you know, it unfortunately, you know, you see people with terrible illnesses, terrible situations, but actually if they're not fit to do their job, they're not fit to do their job. And that's a reason, that is a fair reason to dismiss. And remember, of course, we are taking away their livelihood. We then might give them all sorts of other difficulties, like they can't now pay their mortgages. So the whole thing just sort of snowballs on them. So of course we do that with sympathy and compassion. But actually, if they can't do their job, they can't do their job. They're medically unfit for it. So, you know, having a genuine medical condition is still a fair reason to dismiss. And that almost goes into that previous question as well about the regular short-term absence. You know, yes, you could, you know, it might be that you want to get someone like that across to Occ Health because occasionally there's an underlying cause for that. Like, you know, someone's having regular short-term absence for coughs and colds, whereas in fact what's happening is they're very, very stressed by something happening at home, and that's why they're really struggling. And of course your level of sympathy may be much higher, you know, if for example their other half is now dying and they've got 3 young kids at home and they're trying to manage that and their work, you might be that much more sympathetically than you keep getting colds.
Yeah, and I think that's the that's the importance, isn't it, of having regular discussions with those people to try to see whether there are other things going on that you may not be aware of. A couple of other short questions. How often do you seek advice from the employee's own doctor or medical professional?
Well, my background, I was a GP before I became before I moved into Occ Med, so I kind of got a good general grounding in medicine. But remember, I mean, when I would say the vast majority of people I see are able to give a clear account of their health problems, what treatment they've had, what investigations they've had, what the functional impact is, which is of course the key bit, and I compare that to what their job entails, and will you know, will then advise on fitness to work based on that. So in the vast majority of cases, and I mean probably, you know, I write to GPs once or twice a year, if that. Honestly, it's as unusual as that for routine Occ Health work, and I'll only do that if I'm basically sitting there going, I don't really understand what's going on. When I'm looking at fitness to work, I put people into one of 4 categories: fit to work normally, fit but needs some adjustments, and I'll be clear about what those adjustments are they need, not fit at the moment, or I don't know. So I had a case a month or 2 ago where someone had quite clearly got a psychotic illness that was relatively mild, but really affecting their ability to do their job. And they weren't able to give me a clear opinion. So I just said to them, look, I can't say you're fit to work at the moment, so I'm afraid I'm going to say you're unfit to work, and I now need to speak to your GP to try and understand more about what's going on here and see whether we can get some treatment for you. But it's, you know, I don't write to GPs often because it introduces extra cost, extra delay, and you know, I should be able to understand what the condition is and the functional impact and advise accordingly.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got a couple of questions that are probably more for me. So I presume an employer can therefore dismiss an employee with a disability. Well, yes, you can, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And I would always recommend that you take advice and that you do that carefully through a process with compassion to try to look at all those reasonable adjustments before you get there. I would say it's quite unusual that you actually get to a dismissal. Usually there's a way of either working around it, or perhaps the people agree to part ways because they realise that they can't do that job if the adjustments can't be made. But yes, ultimately you can. And we've had a couple of questions about whether we're obliged to share questions from the employer to the occupational health provider with the employee. My view is we would always draft those letters on the basis that they will be shared, that the employee will see those questions. So I would always draft them on that basis. I don't know what your view is, Charlie.
Well, the biggest challenge you face is that once I receive the referral, it becomes part of their medical record, and they have the right to see that medical record. So they can say to me, "Can I have a copy of the referral?" Now, when they do that, I will go back to them and I will say, "Well, yes, you can. It is part of your records, but as a courtesy, what I'd ask is that you ask the referring manager for a copy first, and if they refuse to let them, well, yes, you are entitled to it." But it does of course introduce that or illustrate that other difficulty, which is, every so often I'll have a manager phone me up and say, "Well, this is sort of the off the record information," and I'll say, "That's absolutely fine, but of course you understand I can't really use that off the record information, because if I start asking questions along that line, the individual is going to smell a rat." So we have to work out, if these are your real problems, we have to work out how you get those in front of me. And as I say, one of the ways is you write a bland referral to begin with, you get a bland report back, and then you use that as the opportunity to come back and seek further information. I think that is often a very effective way if you've got someone who's really tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of time because we have got a couple more things we want to cover. We've got one quick question. Would you recommend the manager use the HSE management standard in cases of stress?
The HSE management standards, I think, are really good, and and if you work your way through those, you are doing really well. So I think any manager who, if you're not familiar with them, just do a Google search, HSE stress management standards, and read through it. The stuff that's published by HSE, I think, is really good. It's very readable. It's very logical and easy to follow. And their advice about stress is really good. I can do a presentation about stress as well, if you like.
Okay. And then I'm just going to do one last question. I'm not sure. I think this came in at the point in a slide and I've waited to ask, so I may not quite know what this is about. But it says, do we need occupational health to confirm that someone is medically fit based on that list, or can we decide ourselves? Now, I'm not quite sure which slide that was based on. If the person who asked that question could just drop me a very quick line, we can perhaps come back to it at the end. We've also had somebody asking if we will be sending out a recording because they missed the first few minutes. Yes, we will be sending that out over the next few days.